The smoke alarm in the 42nd floor server room went off at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning, and that was the moment Vivienne Cole's life changed completely, though she wouldn't understand that until much later. She had been looking for the HR office. That was all. A simple task that, in her defense, was genuinely difficult when the building directory in the lobby listed human resources on floor 4, and the elevator buttons went from 3 to 5 with nothing in between. She'd found a stairwell, climbed one flight, pushed through the first door she found, and walked into a room full of humming black towers and blinking blue lights and one very startled IT technician holding a coffee thermos upside down over a server rack. The thermos was empty, the server was not. "Don't touch anything," the technician said, which was useful advice roughly 4 seconds too late. Vivienne had already reached out to catch the thermos. An instinct, a reflex, the same impulse that had made her the designated dish catcher in her mother's kitchen her whole childhood, and in doing so had knocked her elbow against a panel she hadn't noticed. Which triggered something else, which set off an alarm so loud she could feel it in her back teeth. The technician stared at her. She stared at the flashing red light above the door. Somewhere in the building, she was fairly certain, someone important was being interrupted. She was right. Thornfield Capital occupied floors 38 through 44 of the Meridian Tower in downtown Toronto. It managed north of $12 billion in assets and was run, with remarkable efficiency and zero sentimentality, by its chief financial officer, Sebastian Holt. Sebastian was 39 years old, had never once been late to a meeting, owned 6 identical blue ties, and was broadly regarded by his staff as the kind of man who read financial disclosures the way other people read novels, with genuine absorption and occasional pleasure. He was not unkind exactly. He was precise. He believed precision was a form of respect. He was in the middle of a call with the pension fund partners when his assistant knocked and entered without waiting, which meant something had actually happened. "Server room alarm," she said. "Floor 42. I says it was triggered manually." Sebastian ended the call mid-sentence, something he had never done before in 11 years, and walked to the elevator. Vivienne was still in the server room when he arrived. She had stayed because the technician, whose name badge said Trevor, had asked her to, and because she genuinely hadn't known where else to go, and because some part of her thought leaving the scene of an accidental disaster was worse than staying in it. She was standing very still near the door with her portfolio folder pressed to her chest, trying to look like someone who had not just potentially destroyed critical financial infrastructure. The man who walked in was tall, with a kind of stillness that suggested he was always the most composed person in any room he entered. He wore a dark charcoal suit and no expression whatsoever. He looked at Trevor. Trevor pointed at Vivienne. He looked at Vivienne, looked back. "The alarm is off," she said. I turned it off. Trevor showed me how." She paused. Sebastian said nothing for a moment. He had the particular silence of someone who was doing calculations. "You checked," he said. "The panel I hit, it was the auxiliary coolant monitor. It's a sensor trigger, not a system failure. The alarm goes off if the sensor reads an ambient temperature spike above a certain threshold, which it did when Trevor spilled the coffee, but the actual coolant levels are normal." She turned the portfolio over in her hands. "I looked at the readout. The numbers are all in the right range." Sebastian looked at Trevor. Trevor nodded very slightly, with the expression of a man who was both relieved and deeply confused. "Who are you?" Sebastian asked. "Vivienne Cole. I have a 9 o'clock with HR." She checked her watch. "I'm 8 minutes late now, for context." Sebastian looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "8 on 4. There's no 4, South Elevator Bank." Vivienne looked at the ceiling briefly. "There are 2 elevator banks, yes." She pulled the strap of her bag up onto her shoulder. "In my defense, the lobby directory doesn't specify." Sebastian held the door open for her. She wasn't entirely sure if it was a courtesy or an escort. She walked out anyway. She got the job. It was a junior analyst position in the risk assessment team, entry level, the kind of role where you spent most of your first 3 months learning which reports went to which people and where the good printer was. Her manager was a brisk, organized woman named Dr. Patricia Fielding, who told Vivienne on her first day that Thornfield expected 3 things: accuracy, timeliness, and the ability to notice what other people had missed. Vivienne could do all 3. She just sometimes did them in ways that were difficult to predict in advance. Her second week, she refiled an entire cabinet of quarterly reports, because she'd noticed they were organized by submission date rather than fiscal period, which made cross-referencing take twice as long. Her manager hadn't asked her to do this. Her manager came in on Wednesday morning, opened the cabinet and stood quietly for a moment before saying, "How long did this take you?" 3 hours, Vivienne said. "I came in early. Did anyone authorize?" No, I should have asked. I'm sorry." Patricia looked at the cabinet again, then she said, "Don't apologize. Just tell me next time." What Patricia did not tell Vivienne, though she mentioned it to 2 colleagues at lunch, was that she'd been wanting to reorganize that cabinet for 2 years and had never had the bandwidth. She also did not mention it to Sebastian Holt, who she ran into in the elevator that Friday and who asked, in the particular way he had of making questions sound like items on a checklist, how the new analyst was settling in. "Interesting," Patricia said. Sebastian looked at her. "I mean that as a compliment," she said. Vivienne had been at Thornfield for 6 weeks when she found the error. She almost missed it. She nearly missed it the way you almost miss a wrong note in a piece of music you've heard 100 times, something just slightly off that your brain registers before your consciousness does, a small wrongness that makes you stop and go back. She was reviewing the quarterly projections for the Alderton Infrastructure Fund. A routine task. The kind of thing that took 2 hours if you were careful and 3 if you weren't. And there was a number on page 14 that didn't match the number on page 31. They were supposed to be the same number. They were the same line item, expressed at 2 different points in the report. They were different by $11,000. Vivienne stared at it for a while. $11,000 was not a large number in the context of a fund worth several hundred million. It was the kind of discrepancy that got attributed to rounding. She had seen rounding errors before. She knew what they looked rounding. She went back to the source data. She pulled the underlying spreadsheet and looked at the formula in the cell on page 14. It was correct. She pulled the formula in the cell on page 31. It was also correct. She pulled the data feed that both formulas were drawing from, and she sat with it for a long time. One of the data inputs had 2 versions. There was the version that appeared in the official system, the number that had been entered, reviewed, and approved. And there was a secondary entry, 6 digits buried in a column that should have been blank, that was overriding the calculation in a specific subset of the report. Someone had built a formula that switched inputs depending on which version of the report was being generated. Internal review got one number. External disclosure got another. Vivienne sat back in her chair. Her coffee had gone cold at some point. She didn't remember when. She looked at the column headers. She looked at the file modification history. She looked at who had last touched this spreadsheet. Then she got up very quietly and walked to Patricia's office. Patricia's face did a complicated series of things during Vivienne's explanation. When Vivienne finished, Patricia was quiet for long enough that the ambient hum of the building became audible. "You're sure?" Patricia said. "I've checked it 4 times. Show me." Vivienne showed her. Patricia went through it twice, very slowly, not speaking. Then she picked up her phone and called someone and said 3 words very quietly, "Come to my office," and hung up. Vivienne assumed the someone was her immediate supervisor or maybe the head of risk assessment. She was standing near the window, looking at the spreadsheet, when the door opened and Sebastian Holt walked in. He was in the same charcoal suit. She wondered briefly if he owned multiples of it, the way she'd read that some people did to reduce decision fatigue. He stopped when he saw her. Something moved briefly across his face. "You again," he said. "It keeps happening," Vivienne said. Patricia stood up. "Sebastian, she found something. You need to see this." The next 4 hours were not comfortable for anyone. Sebastian went through the spreadsheet with the methodical focus of someone diffusing something. He pulled other reports. He cross-referenced. He called in 2 other people from the finance team, senior analysts with decades of experience, who bent over laptops and spoke in low voices and occasionally looked at the spreadsheet the way you might look at a wasp that had flown into your house, with wariness in the sense that someone was going to have to deal with it. Vivienne sat in the corner because no one had asked her to leave, and she wasn't sure if she was supposed to. She had a notebook. She took notes. When one of the senior analysts asked her, without looking up, whether she'd checked the Marchfield supplementary filings, she said she hadn't but could, and he handed her a folder without further comment, and she worked through it while they worked through theirs. At some point, someone brought coffee. Vivienne drank 2 cups. At 2 in the afternoon, Sebastian sat back in his chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers, which she was learning was what he did when he was arriving at a conclusion he didn't like. "It's not isolated," he said. "No," one of the senior analysts said. "How far back?" "At least 8 quarters. We're still looking." The silence that followed was the specific kind of silence that exists when everyone in a room is calculating the same number and the number keeps getting larger. Vivienne's most recent estimate, based on what she'd been cross-referencing in the Marchfield filings, was in the range of $60 to $80 million in misrepresented figures across multiple fund documents. She had not said this out loud yet. She wasn't sure if it was her place. Sebastian looked at her. "You're doing the arithmetic in your head right now, aren't you?" "Yes, what number are you at?" she told him. He held her gaze for a moment, then he turned to Patricia. "Clear tomorrow morning. We're going to need legal on this before we go any further." Patricia was already reaching for her phone. Legal came in the next morning. Compliance came in the afternoon. By the end of that week, the matter had been referred to the appropriate regulatory bodies. 2 senior employees had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and Thornfield Capital had retained outside auditors to conduct a full review of all fund documentation going back 4 years. Vivienne sat in on one of the early briefings. Not because she was asked, but because Sebastian had looked at her on Wednesday morning and said, "The auditors will want to understand your methodology. Are you available at 10? And she had said yes before she'd fully registered that the question was directed at her. The lead auditor shook her hand and said, "Walk me through how you found it." She did. He asked 3 follow-up questions. She answered them. He wrote something in his notebook, looked up and said, "You've done forensic accounting work before?" "No," Vivienne said. "I just notice when numbers don't match." He looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote something else. The hardest part of those weeks, for Vivienne, was the uncertainty. She had found something, and that something had started a very large process, and she was a junior analyst who had been at the company for less than 2 months, and she genuinely did not know what came next for her. She ate lunch at her desk. She checked her work 3 times before submitting anything. She was very careful and very quiet and tried not to take up more space than her role required. She noticed that Sebastian Holt, when he passed her in the hallway, now nodded at her. Not the bland courtesy nod of someone acknowledging a junior employee. Something more deliberate than that. She didn't know what to do with it, so she nodded back and kept walking. Her mother called on a Thursday evening and asked how the new job was going. Vivienne sat on her apartment floor with her back against the couch and looked at the ceiling and said, "It's interesting." Her mother, who had raised 3 children and could read subtext through a telephone line, said, "Good interesting or bad interesting?" And Vivienne said, "I honestly don't know yet." The all-staff meeting was scheduled for a Friday. Vivienne found out about it the way everyone else did, an email at 9 in the morning asking all Toronto employees to gather in the main conference space at 2. The subject line said company update, nothing else. The main conference space on floor 40 held about 200 people. By 2 o'clock it was nearly full. Vivienne stood near the back because she'd arrived just at 2 and all the seats were taken, and she found a spot along the wall next to a woman from the Treasury team she'd met briefly at a staff lunch. Sebastian stood at the front of the room. He did not use a podium. He stood in the open space the way he stood everywhere, as though the space had been arranged around him rather than the other way around. He talked about what had happened, not in vague terms, not in the careful language of a legal communication. He was clear and specific about what had been found, what it meant, and what Thornfield was doing about it. He talked about the regulatory referral. He talked about the audit. He talked about the timeline. Then he said, "The discrepancy was identified by Vivienne Cole, a junior analyst on our risk assessment team, who had been with this company for 6 weeks when she found it." Vivienne went very still. "She found something that had been in our system," Sebastian said. "She found it because she looked carefully at a number that didn't match, and she kept looking until she understood why. That is not a small thing." He paused. "Thornfield's commitment to accuracy exists in our documents and our processes. It also exists in the people we hire and what we ask of them. I want everyone in this room to understand that." 200 people turned to look for her. Someone started clapping. Someone else joined in. The woman next to her nudged her arm and said, quietly, "You should probably look like you know where you are." Vivienne realized she had been staring at the floor. She looked up. She found Sebastian's eyes across the room. He gave her a single nod, small, deliberate, the same nod she'd seen in the hallway. She nodded back. Her hands were shaking slightly. She put them in her pockets. The weeks that followed were different. Not dramatically different in the way of movies. Not a sudden promotion and an office with a view, and everyone treating her like a different person. More quietly different. She was included in meetings she hadn't been included in before. Senior analysts asked for her input on things without being asked to. Patricia assigned her more complex files without prefacing them with 3 paragraphs of instruction. and Sebastian Holt, who she continued to encounter in elevators and hallways and occasionally at the coffee station on floor 40, began to talk to her. Not extensively. He was not, she was fairly certain, a person given to extensive talking. But the first time they were both waiting for the elevator on a Wednesday morning, and he said, "The auditors want a second pass on the Marchfield supplementaries. I told them you'd already pulled those." She realized she'd somehow become a fixed point in his mental map of the situation. "I can do a second pass," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I told them." The elevator arrived. They got in. There was a pause. "You were right about the lobby directory, by the way," he said. "I checked. It doesn't specify which elevator bank." Vivienne looked at him. He was looking at the floor numbers. "I know," she said. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved across his face, and then was gone. The formal audit conclusion came in late November. The total figure, the amount misrepresented across all affected documents, across all quarters under review, was confirmed at $73 million. The regulatory process was ongoing. 2 individuals faced professional consequences. Thornfield issued a corrected set of disclosures and a statement to investors. Patricia called Vivienne into her office on a Monday morning and offered her a promotion. It was a meaningful promotion, a title change, a salary increase, a different set of responsibilities, and Patricia laid it out clearly and professionally and said, "You've earned this. It's not a reward for what happened, it's a recognition of what you can do." Vivienne sat with it for a moment. "Can I ask, was this Sebastian's decision?" Patricia considered this. "He initiated the conversation," she said. "But it wouldn't have gone anywhere if the case wasn't there." Vivienne nodded. That felt right. December in Toronto was cold and gray and sidewalk slick, the way it always was. Vivienne walked to work because she liked the morning air, even when the morning air was -11 and her scarf kept sliding off one shoulder. She had a new badge now, the kind that got you into different floors, and she was still getting used to it beeping green instead of the amber it used to beep when she was junior staff. She was in the elevator one Thursday morning when Sebastian got in at the lobby level. He was carrying a paper coffee cup from the place on King Street that she'd noticed he went to most mornings, and he was reading something on his phone, and he looked up when the doors closed. "Cole," he said, which was how he addressed her now. She had noticed this transition. "Holt," she said, which she had started saying back, partly because it seemed appropriate, and partly because she had found experimentally that it made something in his expression shift in a way she found interesting. It happened again now, the very slight thing around his eyes. "You've reviewed the Ellison supplementary?" he asked. "This morning. I left notes in the shared folder. I saw them." He looked back at his phone. They were useful. The elevator stopped at floor 38. He got out. The doors were closing when he turned back and said, "There's a briefing Monday with the compliance team. I've added you to the invite." The doors closed. Vivienne looked at the floor numbers going up and tried not to smile too obviously at an elevator. The compliance briefing was technical and long and involved 3 people from an external firm who used a lot of jargon and took themselves very seriously. Vivienne sat at the far end of the table and took notes and answered 2 questions she was directly asked and did not offer commentary beyond that. Afterward, most people filed out, and she was gathering her notebook when Sebastian said, from the other end of the table, "What were you thinking?" during the 3rd section. She looked up. The room was nearly empty. "About the forward-looking disclosure language," she said. "What about it? It's conservative to the point of being non-informative. If investors are trying to make decisions based on it, they're not getting enough to actually." She stopped. "Sorry, that wasn't asked. I know it wasn't asked. I'm asking now." She told him what she thought. It took about 4 minutes. He listened without interrupting, which she had learned was what he did when he was actually listening, as opposed to waiting for a gap to disagree in. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Write it up," he said. 2 pages. I'll look at it before next quarter." She nodded. He picked up his folder. "The coffee station on 40 has the better espresso," he said without looking at her. "In case you haven't found that yet." He left. Vivienne sat at the conference table for a moment and then wrote that down in her notebook, which was not the kind of thing you normally wrote in a work notebook, but it felt like information she wanted to keep. She found the coffee station on 40. It did have better espresso. She went there one morning in January and found him already there, reading a physical document with a pen in his hand, making small precise notations in the margin. He looked up. "Cole Holt." She made her coffee. He went back to his document. The building hummed around them. Outside the window, snow was coming down steadily over downtown Toronto, blurring the edges of the other towers. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He didn't look up. Why did you stay in the server room that first morning? After you'd confirmed the system was fine, he was quiet for a moment. He set the pen down. You had already identified the issue and explained the solution before I could ask any of the right questions, he said. I wanted to know if that was a one-time event or a pattern, and he picked up his pen again. Pattern, he said, and looked back at his document. Vivienne drank her coffee. The snow kept falling. For what it's worth, she said, I did eventually find the HR office. I know. Patricia told me. She told you? He glanced up briefly. Something in his eyes was warmer than his expression let on. She said the new analyst had arrived late because she'd taken the wrong elevator and set off a server alarm and then correctly diagnosed the cause before the IT team did. I thought it was worth paying attention to. Vivienne looked at him. He was already reading again. She thought about the lobby directory. She thought about the elevator, and the thermos, and the smoke alarm, and the $11,000 discrepancy on page 14 of a quarterly report. She thought about the way a wrong turn could become the right place, if you had enough stubbornness to stay and look. She thought, not for the first time, that Thornfield Capital was a very strange place to have ended up, and that she was very glad she'd taken the wrong elevator. She sent him the 2-page memo on the disclosure language on a Wednesday afternoon. He read it and sent back 4 words, good. Let's discuss Thursday. Thursday became a standing meeting that neither of them formally proposed or formally agreed to. It just appeared on both their calendars and stayed there. They talked about disclosures and risk frameworks and occasionally about things that were not directly work-related. A book she mentioned, a conversation she'd had with the auditors, his habit of reading physical documents in an era when no one else at Thornfield did anymore. It's slower, he said once. Slower is better for certain things. You've never made a mistake reading something slowly? He looked at her. I've made mistakes reading too fast. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Same. It was not a grand admission. It was a Tuesday morning in February and the snow had turned to slush outside, and they were sitting in a boardroom with leftover lunch containers from someone else's earlier meeting still on the side table. But something shifted slightly, the way things shift when a fact about another person becomes real to you instead of theoretical. She said, the first time I walked into your server room, I thought you were going to have me removed from the building. I considered it, he said. And then you told me the coolant levels were fine and cited the specific sensor threshold, and I thought. He paused. He seemed to be choosing something. I thought that wasn't the kind of person you removed from buildings. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, she told him. He looked pained in the very particular way of a person who is trying not to be pleased about something. That's a low bar. It's a start, she said. Spring came to Toronto the way it always did, sudden and uneven and full of false starts, warm one week and cold the next, the cherry trees on Front Street going from bare to impossible pink in what felt like 2 days. Vivienne started leaving her heavy coat at the office on Fridays. She found a lunch spot 3 blocks from Meridian Tower that had good pho, and she went there with the woman from Treasury, whose name was Adeze, who turned out to be one of the funniest people Vivienne had ever met. Life at Thornfield had organized itself into something that felt, for the first time, like a place she was meant to be. She still noticed numbers. She still reorganized things without always asking first, though she'd gotten better at mentioning it to Patricia in advance. She still went to the coffee station on 40 most mornings, and Sebastian was usually there, and they talked until one or both of them had somewhere to be. One morning in April he was not there when she arrived. She made her coffee and looked at the snow that had finally stopped for good and thought about the Alderton Fund review she was leading, her project, her name on it, and heard the elevator open behind her. He came in with his coat still on, slightly damp at the shoulder from rain, looking like someone who had moved faster than usual to get somewhere. You're late, she said. Meeting ran over. He took off his coat. He looked tired, she thought, but the specific tired of someone who has been productive rather than the tired of someone who has been defeated. He made his coffee. He stood next to her at the window. The Alderton Review, he said. How is it looking? Clean, she said, genuinely clean. It's actually nice looking at something and finding that everything is where it should be. He was quiet for a moment. That's rare. I know. The rain was coming down harder now, steady against the glass, the street below turning shiny and dark. Vivienne, he said. She had noticed over the past months that he'd only used her first name when he was being careful about something, when he was taking to look at him. He was looking out the window. There's a dinner Thursday. Compliance and some of the external auditors, the final sign-off meeting for the Thornfield Review. He paused. "I'd like you to be there. As the analyst who identified the issue? As someone whose judgment I trust." She held onto the warmth of her coffee cup and looked at the side of his face. The morning light was gray and wet and not especially flattering, and he was still exactly himself. Still precise, still certain, still the kind of person who read physical documents and owned 6 identical ties and had once stayed in a server room longer than he needed to because he wanted to understand what he was looking at. "Okay," she said. He nodded. He drank his coffee. The rain kept falling. Neither of them moved toward the door for a while. The dinner was fine. More than fine, actually. The auditors were interesting people once you got them out of a boardroom, and Vivienne ended up in a long conversation with the lead auditor's colleague about data integrity standards that she genuinely didn't want to end. Sebastian sat across the table and, when she glanced at him, was watching her with the particular attention of someone confirming something they'd already suspected. They left at the same time. It had stopped raining. The streets were clean and cool, the city lit up against a sky that had gone from gray to the deep blue of a late April evening. They walked half a block before Sebastian said, "You were right about the disclosure language. We've incorporated your memo into the revised framework." "I heard," she said. "Patricia told me." "Of course she did. She also told me you argued for it in the framework meeting." He didn't respond to that. "Sebastian," she said. He stopped walking. She stopped too, a half step ahead of him, and turned around. The streetlight was behind her. His face was very clear in the evening light. The carefully held stillness of it, and the thing that was underneath the stillness that she had been noticing for months now and hadn't known what to call. "I took the wrong elevator," she said. "I set off a fire alarm. I found an error that was costing this company $73 million, and now I'm standing on King Street and I think you might." She stopped. She tried again. "I think I should tell you that I'm glad I took the wrong elevator." Sebastian was quiet for long enough that a streetcar went past and someone on the sidewalk walked around them and the light changed twice. "I would have found you eventually," he said. "You would have made yourself noticeable." "That's not a compliment." "It is," he said. "The way I mean it." The light changed again. He said, "The coffee station on 40. Tomorrow morning." "I'll be there," she said. "I know." He walked one way and she walked the other, and the city went on around her, and she did not stop smiling for approximately 6 blocks. The morning after, the coffee station on 40 was warmer than usual, because someone had opened the window that overlooked the atrium, and the air coming through carried the particular smell of a Toronto spring. Damp concrete and new leaves, and the distant sweetness of someone's takeout from the food court below. Sebastian was already there. He handed her a coffee before she'd touched the machine. She looked at it. "I noticed how you make it," he said in the tone of a person stating a fact. She took the cup, she drank. It was exactly right. Outside, the city was going about its morning. The TTC and the cyclists and the people in good coats moving fast along Bay Street, and in here it was warm and quiet, and he was reading his document with his pen in his hand, making his small, precise marks, and she was standing at the window with a coffee made exactly the way she liked it, and it was such an ordinary morning, and she thought that ordinary was entirely underrated. "I was thinking," she said. "You often are," he said without looking up. "About the lobby directory." He set the pen down. He looked at her with the expression she had come to know as him actually paying attention, the real kind. "Someone should fix it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, something that was unmistakably a smile crossed his face. The first real one she'd seen, unhurried and genuine and completely changing the geometry of him. "I'll put a note in," he said. And she laughed and he watched her laugh, and the spring morning moved on around them, and it turned out that a wrong door and a smoke alarm and a number that didn't match on page 14 was exactly how 2 people like them found each other.